me start at the beginning again because I know I've repeated this many times, and some of you have heard it, so hopefully you can get something out of it. Again, and some of you haven't heard it, and it's a story that I like to tell because it it strings together for me the set of experiences that have really put me on this path. And it goes something like this, that in our mesmerization of the phenomenal world, our attention goes outside. It goes to the environment. And in the fascination and pleasure and joy of the phenomenal world, we become mesmerized, and we start to forget or not pay attention to that primary state of consciousness, or PSB, primary state of being, I think is how I put it in the training. And we start to imagine that we are that state of externalization. And with that state of externalization comes a sense of both fascination with what's there, or what appears to be there on the outside, and what we don't notice is happening is there's a disconnection on the inside with that PSB, or that the primary state of consciousness, this field of being that is our I hesitate to say complete self, but is what we are. So in that losing of the totality of what we are, the externalization of our attention towards the world, we get disconnected. So let me see if I can explain this properly. We get fascinated on the outside, disconnected on the inside. That disconnection creates a craving, a desire for something more. We don't realize that the something more is here. What we have now taken for granted, and like the air, no longer notice. We don't realize. We don't have that realization. So, and our attention is always to the outside. So we start to become hungry for more experiences, for more things. We try to consume, in a sense, the environment in search of that which is here, which is missing. And in that, and that which is here, or partly we feel it here in the nausea, of the existential nausea of being a human being. In that existential angst and disconnection and isolation arises a fear. So there's a low-grade or high-grade anxiety with fear. My attention, I don't really realize what's fueling that. My attention is out here, looking, searching, grasping. And everything I grasp, it lasts for a little while. The sun feels good for a while, or the swim feels good for a while, or the sex feels good for a while, or the new car feels good for a while, or the new house feels good for a few years anyway, until I've got to hire all kinds of gardeners and everything else, the house starts to own me instead of me owning the house. That incessant desire and craving that can't be fulfilled keeps going, while in here the desperation keeps growing, because the more I have, the more I want, and the more I have and I want, the more I know on the inside that I'm not getting it, it's not working. Even the praise and the success and the respect and the status in society and everything that I've tried to go out there and get, it hasn't worked. And that depression, actually what arises, it doesn't always come in this order, but often what arises then is an anger. Gosh, I did it right. I worked hard. I did what I was supposed to do for my family. I did all these things that I was supposed to do. Or I didn't do them, and I took the risky road and the road less traveled, and I was an artist, and now I'm penniless. And, I've society has abandoned me. Either way, whether you go the conservative route, security route, or the more risky, adventurous, bohemian route, or the rebel route, or whatever you want to call it, often the result is the same. Because externally, this can't be, you can't solve this in here, that fundamental disconnection from consciousness and abandonment of primary state of being. So there's an abandonment of what we are for the environment. It's not quite right, but it's close, right? What I'm saying to you are words and metaphors, so they're always going to be a little bit off. That state can't be satisfied. So I'm chasing after it, and I'm getting angry, and I'm getting frustrated, I'm getting depressed, right? And as that occurs, I have to keep boosting my meaning making. I mean, I either have to find other ways to consume and to get something. I have a wonderful sunset, or I have a wonderful time with my children. We try to, or with a loved one. If we're smart, we get out of the cars and the material things and the money, and we get into personal relationships. But those personal relationships can't give us a relationship with ourselves. So even that will fail if you don't have this fundamental connection with consciousness. And then what happens is you have to explain to yourself why you're not getting what you need and what's wrong with you. And now I start to retroflect on myself. What's wrong with me? How come I don't feel okay? How come there's this gnawing thing in the background? There's this huge monster that's going to consume me and makes me want to drink or think about suicide or do something crazy. Right? What's wrong with me? And that search for what's wrong, I mean, that's the whole basis of psychotherapy, is trying to undo the knots that we create when we start to organize our self-experience around the fact that we've not been able to achieve the peace and connection with our humanity that we wanted. So that's the fundamental, I call it the fundamental story, the fundamental problem. And there's a couple ways to address it. Of course, the most obvious, and we can be thankful for the non-dual teaching, the direct path, and those people that are out there in the forefront saying, forget don't waste your time, just go for the connection, just go for this relational connection with all that is, with the very core of your being, and that will solve your problems. Well, indeed that's true. However, we still have to then come into the relative, and I think I've given a number of talks of how we transition from the non-dual, more expanded states to the more collapsed, or the more what appears to be the more identified states, or the relative conditioned existence, and how once you get that fundamental field of consciousness that's organizing, then you see pretty quickly that the collapse isn't necessary, that now you're actually in a much better place to navigate the world and to be much more functional, because you don't have the built-in resistance, and you don't have the anxiety, and you don't have the twistedness of the psychological game playing with yourself to try to answer what's wrong and what's wrong with the world and all that stuff that is crazy making and torturing. So tonight, what I want to say to you in our meeting today is that the whole process of how of how we become disconnected, isolated, and then longing, unfulfilled, and then angry, and then how that turns on us, as I described, and how that turns into this "what's wrong with me," and a whole bunch of a whole bunch of pathology emerges out of that. That whole process is something that we can deal with effectively in two ways. And the first, of course, is by the cultivation of consciousness, by the realization of consciousness. That's, of course, the number one. And then the second, number two in that, is the awareness of how your experience is arising, how it's being organized, how you're organizing your experience. Also how the environment, of course, is programming us. We're not inventing these organizations. We're being taught them by our families of origin and the media and the society, and all of these things are influencing us to be hungry ghosts and to pursue that which is not, which doesn't bring satisfaction, and to search for security, either in physical security in the form of building castles and safe homes. I use the metaphor of castles, but building safe homes and pursuing status and pursuing control. All these things that people try to do to escape from this whole nest. Now, there's one more piece I want to add about the nest, and that is that this false self or fictitious self that's built up to try to compensate for the fundamental disconnection that I talked about earlier, that fictitious self is held together by two things. One is time, that everything has a beginning and an end, and that's problematic because we don't want things to end. We want consistency. So if it stops and if it's intermittent, then that's a problem for consistency in terms of security. Are you there? Can I hold on to you, or are you going to disappear? Is there a beginning and an end, or are you constant for me? So that's a problem, and so that's the time part. And the space is: are we together? Are we connected? Are we far apart? Am I all by myself? You see. So the fundamental experiences of time and space, the fundamental experience of time and space is what all of these problematic pieces are built on. If you had a different framework than time and space, and one of the different frameworks, or one of them that we're all familiar with, is the idea of immortality. Where I'm immortal. There is no beginning and no ending. I am the Alpha and the Omega, or God is the Alpha and the Omega. And that if I'm good, I'm born to eternal life and so forth. So that takes care of the time part. And then, of course, I sit at the feet of God, and I think there's a lot of stuff in the scriptures about how you're close to God, you're in God's kingdom, so that takes care of the space part. However, in meditation, what you notice, and if you'll notice if you keep practicing through the training, is that the sense of time and space dissolves in meditation. It dissolves in our experience of higher consciousness. Again, higher and lower, let's be careful. Advanced and not advanced. These are just metaphors. This expanded state of consciousness, the time dissolves, and the distance between inside yourself, the distance of being away from subject-object, there is no subject-object to be away from, so distance is solved. So you've got the problem of time and space being solved, and you've got the problem of distance being solved. The other piece that's really important is cause and effect. that's the second part of the matrix that is so problematic, because if there things are causing other things, if I'm at the cause of the environment, not the effect. If I'm at the effect of the environment and I'm not the cause, who knows what can happen? Things are going to be out of control. Things are going to be changing. I'm going to have to be surrendering. I better get into a surrender practice really quick. So when one thing is causing another, this is also a problem. And if you meditate, once again, you find that there's nothing causing your consciousness. There's actually nothing at cause, or better way to say it is, you are not at the effect of anything. Nothing is affecting consciousness because nothing is actually moving in the way that we're thinking about things moving. That whole frame of reference, you see, we look out to the external world, we see how it works. If I go and kick the table, if I go and slap you in the head, there's a cause and effect there. Or at least it appears like there's a cause and effect. Or certainly if somebody, if we take a gun out and I shoot myself, I will be dead. There's a cause and effect. It really looks as if there's a cause and effect out there. And it looks as if outside things are beginning and ending. The sun is coming up, the sun is going down. The breath is coming in, the breath is going out. So there's the external world, the world that we're used to perceiving, and it's wrong to say it's really, it's so funny to try to talk about this, that, there isn't really an external world in the way that we're thinking about it, but the hell with it, I'll say the external world, the way it appears and functions through the laws of physics, and even now we see that breaking down, of course, with the quantum mechanics and so forth, but it looks like, for all practical purposes, as if this is how it works. Things begin at the end and end, and there's cause and effect. On the inside in consciousness, in the expanded state, which is neither inside nor outside, actually, and it's non-dimensional, this thing isn't functioning. It isn't working like that. One thing isn't causing another. There are things that are arising, things that are corresponding, things that are coming into phenomenon, but they're not being caused in the same way that you can say that, a billiard ball model of the world or a watchmaker mechanical view is happening. So tonight, as you go into your meditation practice, I want you to remember this. Remember and find out for yourself. Notice how that time and space dissolves as you meditate. Notice how cause and effect dissolves. You're not at the cause. You're not at the effect of anything. And actually, you're not even at the cause of anything. Things are simply appearing and disappearing. And even though it looks as if that appearance and disappearance has a duration, if you notice that the field from which it's appearing and disappearing, the ocean of consciousness, is there. Or I would say it's not there, actually, is a better description. But if I said, of course, it's not there, that would not make a good narrative for us tonight. But such is the nature of the mystical experience, and such is the nature of the, that words are not able to express this stuff except in paradox and in contradiction.